Welcome everybody to tonight's presentation. It looks like it's going to really be a good one. We have a great collection that Annie Sollinger is going to be talking about, and the person who gave the collection, Paul, is here. So that's kind of a unique perspective for us. I want to let you know that we are really cranking up for our next Photographica show, which would be April 26th, I think it is. That's Saturday. Um, and so we're really excited about that. We're also excited that we finally got the 2024 journal out. So we were able to put out two journals in the course of about a month and a half or so. There's a lot of work getting those out, but we think they came out pretty well. Just to update you too, we did get some interest in having the 2023 journal be made into a hardcover. That was the anniversary issue. And we are working towards that. What we'll be doing is having all of the information that's now online for the 2023 incorporated into a hardcover, a hard copy in the 2024. So that'll be a nice piece of memorabilia to have, I think, for years to come. So I will be updating you on that. And on that line, the publication committee, we're still looking for good articles and also for good help. It takes a lot of time and effort to put these publications out. And in fact, at the last board meeting, in order to maybe encourage people to consider writing up some of the great knowledge that is stored in the minds of our members, to encourage them to maybe write something up so we can publish it. We're going to start offering an honorarium, maybe as high as $500 per writer. So we're working out the details on that, and I will be updating you probably at the next meeting on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dana to introduce our speaker. And Dana, take it away.
Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator, and just a few housekeeping things before we start. You can type your questions into the chat during the presentation, or Annie has said that she doesn't mind taking a question during. If you move your mouse to the top right corner of the screen under view, speaker view is best for this, and I'm going to just keep an eye on the chat to see if anybody has any technical difficulties. You can type that in there too. So, in the fall of 2019, longtime PHSNE member Paul Rheingold donated his extensive collection of historic photographs to the Special Collections and University Archives, SCUA, at UMass Amherst. And nearly simultaneously, librarian Annie Sollinger joined the department as its first visual archivist. Tonight, she'll share her experiences working with the collection of over 55,000 photographs, representing a broad range of formats and processes used between about 1860 and 1920. In addition to this collection, Annie will discuss the history of the photograph in archives and libraries. Annie Sollinger works at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Robert S. Cox Special Collections and University Archives Research Center with the title Visual Archivist. She's also a library liaison to art in the Department of the History of Art and Architecture with a special interest in visual literacy. She has a master's degree in information studies and a master's in art history, focusing on medieval manuscripts. She is also a practicing photographer and visual artist. And Annie, meeting is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all for having me, and thanks Dana for the nice introduction. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen because I'm already nervous and I don't want to think about my own face. So hold on a second. Sorry. Okay, how's that? Can you see my presentation? Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is a version of a talk I gave in September at UMass. We had Paul come up to finally sort of commemorate his collection coming to us. So we had a really nice event there. So this is an adapted version of that. And Paul, as I said, feel free to heckle me. Paul also presented at this event. So I'll try to fill in some of what he talked about, but I assume that some of you are familiar with his collection, but I'll try and give some more details about it. So I'm going to talk about Paul's collection. I'm going to talk about how it fits into the rest of what we have at SCUA. We call ourselves SCUA at UMass. And then I'm going to talk about sort of my own research interests. So that's kind of the sort of trends of picture collections and organizing photographs in archives and libraries, and then also how a collection like this might be used. Okay, so this is a photograph, the title slide here, this is a photograph from Paul's collection that he had set aside, which I really love. I think that's Niagara Falls. And here's a nice one where I also scan the back of it. So we see Ice Bridge, 1893. So I'm going to talk about myself for a little bit. And I'm also going to talk about where I work. So the Robert S. Cox Special Collections and University Archives Research Center. It's a mouthful. So as I said, we call ourselves SCUA. We are at UMass Amherst. We're on the 25th floor of the Du Bois Library. So we collect in a few different areas. The basis of our collections is the University Archives, so the records of UMass dating back to its founding in 1863 as the Massachusetts Agricultural College. So that includes, you know, the usual administrative records, but also a very large photo collection, which is very rich. A lot of that collection has been digitized and is put online in our digital repository with limited metadata, but it's still a very rich visual resource. Branching out from UMass itself, we collect around the history and cultures of New England. So that includes a lot of family papers, some of which I'll be talking about in a bit. That also includes things like the records of the New England Yearly Meeting of Friends. So that includes materials such as minute books dating back to the 1600s. A smaller collecting area is around innovation and entrepreneurship. That's sort of a special UMass flavored area that my one of my fellow archivists, Kirsten, she works with the sport management program, but she also works with the Mark McCormick papers. So he's the founder of IMG and, you know, a pioneer in sports marketing. So not really my area, but there's a little bit of overlap with all of these. And then finally, we are best known, I would say, for our social change collections. So that's a lot of different activist movements, individual activists, as well as organizations. What that looks like for me as the visual archivist is I work a lot with 20th century photojournalism collections. So lots of photographs of protests and different activist groups, things like that. Okay, so a little bit about me. Here's a picture of a rock that I took. This will be on screen for a moment. So I'm the first person to hold the title of visual archivist in SCUA, but I've been at UMass in the library since 2013. My first position was working with visual resources. So that's the name for the field that primarily deals with images of works of art that typically supports the study of art history. So what used to be slide libraries now is mostly digital images. It's a field that I love, but with the advent of digital images, it's really changed a lot. When I left that department, we still had a pretty sizable slide collection, not heavily circulated, but it's still there, which is nice. And as Dana said in my introduction, I've been up in the archives since 2019. While my title is archivist now, I'm also a library liaison. And I have a master's through the art history program at UMass. So I think in both worlds. And there is tension between libraries and archives, I'd say, or librarians and archivists. I won't get into it. Obviously, your practices are very different. Sometimes it gets contentious, but I like to live in both worlds. but that does mean I have sort of a complicated role in the libraries. And because of that, I will be sort of blurring the lines between libraries, archives, and special collections in this talk. My own background in photography goes back to learning black and white darkroom practice in high school. I spent many hours in the darkroom. I wanted to pursue a career in photojournalism, but I ended up studying art history at NYU, where I took photo history classes with Shelley Rice. She's a great writer and teacher. I got interested in that program in museum archives, and that led me to library school. I was interested in things like provenance research, but I ended up at UT Austin. On my way to Austin, all of my cameras got stolen out of my car, which broke my heart, and I wanted to get away from photography, but I failed. My first job as a grad student was at the Harry Ransom Center. I was working with the photo morgue of the New York Journal American. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then for the end of my time at UT as a master's student, I held an internship at the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History, which is also known for its photojournalism collections. Here, this is a slightly more fun visual here. So as I said, I've been shooting 35mm forever with a variety of cameras. My Nikon is one that got stolen, but I have a little Pentax now. I love instant photography. I hoarded Polaroid film when it was being discontinued. I did the same for Fuji peel apart film. I'm not a fan of the rebooted Impossible Polaroid film, but I do like the Fuji Instax. I've had a couple of different Holga cameras. I've shot a bit of 4x5. The previous slide was a 4x5 negative. My favorite camera is my Amamiya C330. But this camera here is very special. My dad gave this to me. The case that it's held in, my grandpa made when he was in the Air Force. And the story in my family is that Henry Ford himself gave this camera to my grandmother, to Kodak Retina, when she was a student at the Greenfield Village School in Dearborn, Michigan. So I've shot a few rolls with it, but it is very precious, so I don't like to take it out too much, but it's a beautiful little camera. And about my own art practice, it's the last thing I'll say about myself. I like to make books and zines with my photographs. So here's an example of kind of a silly one that's all pictures are taken of rocks and stone and bricks and then sequenced. And it's printed on newsprint. I think that there is a lot of interesting work to be done with the selection of arrangement of images, which serves the Rheingold collection well as a resource for artists. And I'll give a few examples later on. Okay, so here we have some pictures from Paul's study where we collected the photos in 2019. So I started working in the department in June of 2019. My first donor visit with the late Rob Cox was to drive several hours and visit Paul at his home and check out the collection. So he and his wife Joyce, who are here, they welcomed us into their home and they showed us his office and a couple of other nooks and crannies in the basement, lined with photographs. So Rob, his description that we have online is it's a collection of roughly 50,000 photographs mounted on board dating from around 1860 into the early 20th century. The photos are of the quote unquote vernacular type in a wide range of sizes and mostly depart from typical formats such as carte de visite or cabinet cards. They are categorized into a complex but legible taxonomy devised by the donor, which I think that's a nice way of putting it. So Paul has, I think many of you are familiar with this, but Paul collected these photographs over about 35 years, and his great project has been sorting them into about 3,600 categories total. So that's kind of, yeah, the jumping off point for all of this research. So we accepted Paul's donation in total, and the photographs came to us over a few trips in 2019 and 2020, I think 2021 as well. This was no easy feat. I would like to thank Paul again for his patience in getting everything moved up to UMass. There were a couple of complicated trips with movers, but everything is safe and sound. in the libraries at UMass. And of course, there have been some circumstances in the intervening years. Okay. So while photographs appear in many of our collections in SCUA at UMass, we do have about 100 dedicated photograph collections, some of which fit into those larger collecting areas, but some of which are kind of standalone collections. So these range from 19th century portfolios, such as the Beato one on the left, to 20th century photojournalist archives, as I mentioned. On the right is a photograph by Frank Waugh, who was an early sort of founder of the culture at UMass. And this is a hand-colored photograph from his collection. We have a lot of really beautiful lantern slides. And I think we have some autochromes of his, but I might be making that up. We have, I'd say, some of the greatest hits in our collections for early processes and formats for positive images. And I do want to say, while I have some expertise and I love to do research on individual photographs, my job is primarily to provide access to these materials. So I don't know everything about every photograph. I can't always identify something right off the bat. But my job is really just to provide access to researchers and people like all of you to come in and take a look at things. As you all know, identifying a photographic process can help you determine a date. Vice versa, the process tells us how a photograph is made. As we all know, the format is how the final product appears. I did take a great workshop with conservator Gowan Weaver several years ago on identification. That was really great. So some of these images that we have. So we do have a few daguerreotypes. I love this example, the little portrait in the middle, and then the daguerreotype copy of it on the right. Most of these photographs that I'm going to point out are from different family collections. I won't specify which, but please feel free to follow up with me and I can connect you to those individual collections. The painting in the middle here is oil and ivory. And again, going back to my love of the images of works of art, I think that this is just a really fun example of a daguerreotype. We have many collodion processes, ambrotypes, tintypes. We do have some card photographs, more standard ones, cards of visite and cabinet cards. The one on the right, I believe this is from Paul's collection. We do have, let's see. Oh, here's kind of a fun one from the university photograph collection. So it's a picture postcard that shows you all of the cabinet card portraits of a certain class. I think it's like the class of 1882, printed much later. And let's see. Yeah, a bunch of different processes. Another thing that I like about having Paul's collection is drawing connections that you might not expect between his photographs and other collections. So the photograph on the left here is by R.P. Slater. It's from the W.E.B. Du Bois papers. That's one of the sort of keystone collections that we have at UMass. And it's from 1905. It was the first meeting of what came to be called as the Niagara Movement. So that was the first meeting of several like-minded Black intellectuals in the United States. And their work eventually led to the founding of the NAACP. So that's Du Bois kind of in the middle. He's looking off into the distance. So this is just part of the great tradition of pictures made by tourists visiting Niagara Falls. And, I think this one is pretty obvious. I don't know if we have the actual, like, quote unquote, original. We have a copy though, and it's pretty easy to tell that it's a composite. You can probably even tell from your screen, just the way things are cut out, the way the shadows fall. Most photo historians know that these are composites, that it's not a portrait taken right in front of the falls, but composite or taken in front of a backdrop. And so we have between these two photographs, we have a nearly identical view of Niagara Falls. And the one from Paul's collection on the right, you can really see we have this sort of fuzzy edge where the floor is bleeding off between that couple. I think this one, you can also kind of see there's some fingerprints, which is very charming. And since, we're always thinking about Du Bois at SCUA, there's a couple of other parallels that are nice to draw. So Du Bois himself was a collector of photographs. He collected photographs of Black Americans. These are now held by the Library of Congress. He arranged them and displayed them at the 1900 Paris exposition. And let's see, so this is one photograph. They've digitized these at the Library of Congress. We have on the right here, this is a photograph from the Du Bois papers showing his display at the exposition in 1900. There aren't many photographs of that display, but this one gets used quite heavily. And then on the left, I have the recto and verso of a photograph from the Rheingold collection. Paul has sort of recognized the value of early photographs of African Americans. Even when we don't have much information about the people pictured, we do have just this really wonderful record. And Victoria Nelson, who knows if that's the right name here. So, okay, zooming out a little bit then. As libraries and archives, we talk about access points to materials. So for creative works, the primary access point is usually the name of the author or artist. So thinking about these other photo collections, I usually know who took the picture, and that's how I can sort of get in. Another important concept in libraries and archives and museums as well is provenance. So that's where the item came from. For a manuscript collection, such as the W.E.B. Du Bois papers, this is Du Bois himself as the creator, and then his widow as the steward of his papers after his death. For a rare book or medieval manuscript, we hope to get provenance information from the donor. The ownership, as far back as we can trace it, is what we're hoping to collect. For modern photographs, the provenance usually goes to the photographer. And as I've said, we usually access collections by the photographer's name. So this gets a little different with photo collections like this. While manuscript archives date back to the beginning of the written word, modern archival practice is relatively new, so about 100 years old. There are best practices and standards, but when it comes to the actual work of archiving, as my coworker Caroline likes to say, it depends. And current practices around photographs are still evolving. And as we all know, as I'm sure you all know, society's regard for photography has changed greatly over time. Now we certainly take it for granted in its disembodied digital form, mostly embodied by phones, where many of us take pictures. And I won't get into historical debates about its artistic or scientific merits, but I will emphasize, in my view, that a photograph is always a representation. At the same time, early proponents of photographic technology also imagined a picture library because we can have pictures of things. Let's see. Sorry, got a little out of order here. So thinking again about the history of archives and the history of photographs in archives, photographs were kind of disrespected in archival practice in the early 20th century. They were not typically regarded as primary sources themselves. Pictorial materials were often removed from the context of a collection into a general picture file. The principle of provenance was seldom applied to these images. Things changed through the 20th century. The market for photographs as art sort of picked up in the 1970s. And then by the 1980s, things had changed so that it wasn't until then that many photographs were sort of taken out of picture collections, then back into archives where they wouldn't be circulating. So I'll talk a bit more about those. So the Rheingold photograph collection stands out among many photo collections and archives. Although we do have other aggregations of material assembled by one collector based on their interests. An example of this, we have at school, we have a collection of ephemera having to do with labor unions assembled by one collector. So boxes and boxes and boxes of like buttons, things like that. The industry term for a collection like that is an artificial or assembled collection, which is an intentionally assembled collection of archival resources with varying provenances. So again, we don't know the names of most of the photographers for the works in this collection beyond the studio. And because of how the collection was assembled and the nature of the material, we don't have meaningful provenance for individual items. But we do have Paul. And in some cases, we have information from the dealers he's worked with as well. We don't have any written information about the vast majority of the collection. Thankfully, each photograph carries a great deal of information about itself and the conditions at the moment of its creation. I've talked a bit about formats, and this collection is actually perfect, I would say, for studying processes and formats, because these photographs are not in perfect condition. And that's kind of the point to me. Many of the tricks of identifying a photograph depend on how a photograph deteriorates over time and in certain conditions. So a scratch in a photograph can give you an insight into how it was made. And while, I always emphasize that a photograph is a representation and not a simple reflection of reality, every photograph is, among other things, the product of a series of decisions. There's no such thing as objectivity, in my view, and there's certainly no such thing as neutrality, even in a library, I always need to say. At the same time, with a photograph, we are working with the literal index of reflected light, so we can use common sense in interpreting the evidence. And this is kind of something I will talk about with students when we're students who maybe have never held a photograph like this before, thinking about visual literacy. So all of that said, I have done some research on individual photographs, which has been pretty fun. And again, this isn't like the meat of my job, but it's been a treat to sort of get to use some of these skills to figure out what's going on in an individual photograph. So this is one that Paul set aside in his sort of best category. So we have this lovely portrait of a young man who's tidily dressed. We have this nice oval-shaped albumin print, and I did a little digging. I was able to track down the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, because there are archives online of Post covers, and found this cover featuring old Gordon Graham, October 3rd, 1903. And the board on this photograph is marked by the Ryman and Company studio in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then there are photographs that I don't know anything about, and that's fine because they're just wonderful images. I love brooms. I've got a thing for brooms, and I just really love this one. I think this came from the working category. It's just it's a little bit maybe hard to read, but it's a broom factory. We have many beautiful brooms on display out front, and there's one worker reclining up on the roof, just having a great time. Some other treats. These photographs in this collection, they might echo other well-known photographs. I'm a big fan of Walker Evans, so this photograph on the left is from Paul's collection. It's a really incredible sort of montage of baby pictures. From 1896 is the date, but it made me think of this sort of famous photo by Walker Evans of the window of a portrait studio, where you have sort of a different composite. Oh, and we do have the back of this one, babies, from Fall City, Nebraska. And somebody has written Eddie's picture in here, which is just really sweet. Somebody found a baby they knew. Some of the photographs in the Rheingold collection are just very plainly beautiful to me. There are a lot of horses. But we have a whole series, horse and other animals other than the horse, which is a really useful distinction because there are so many photographs of horses, dogs and cats, and then the most narrow category here is dogs and women. And I just love this photograph. I think it's beautiful. It's nice composition. The light is beautiful. Just this interaction between a woman and this dog. Some of the pet photos are among my favorites. And I think that they're exemplify what the sort of most important role that handling a primary source can play, which is that it connects you to history. You can see that these people loved their dogs nearly as much as I love mine, who is sleeping off to the side. I'm actually shocked that he's not barking right now. But here's another great one from Dogs and Women, dog, pug. Okay, so that's getting into this collection on a more or less granular level. So if you're visiting the archives, and you don't have the access point of a photographer's name or the roll of film or the year that we might have in other collections, how do you find a photo? So I have a quote from an older SAA book. So SAA is the Society of American Archivists. Researcher demand for access to the subject matter shown in photographs is high. Archivists should try to provide access for image content as well as for provenance. This is typically achieved through item level description and the application of subject headings from a controlled vocabulary. So for Paul's collection, we do have his categories, which are distinct to Paul's sensibilities, but I think they're also broadly applicable and useful. And this brings up another sort of industry term for archives, which is original order. So this is the organization and sequence of records established by the creator of the records in an archival collection. That order isn't always clear. Sometimes we'll get someone's papers and it appears that someone has just pulled everything off their desk and shoved it in a box with no order. We have to sort of figure out what will make it actually useful for researchers. But in this case, we do have the categories. We have Paul's physical arrangement, and we can map that to the intellectual arrangement, which is the I should have mentioned the 62-page document, I believe, that outlines all the categories. As Paul has said, no two people would arrange these photographs the same. In archives, we typically arrange groups of items. But as one person sorting things out, you look for some logic and consistency. So in thinking about how I could provide meaningful access using Paul's categories, I started thinking about similar assemblages of images. So I have 3 examples. So the first of these is the photo morgue, which I mentioned when I was working as a student at the Ransom Center in Texas. It was a pretty basic job. I was just rehousing, so that means moving photographs out of their old acidic folders into acid-free folders. I took a lot of pictures while I was doing that work. I wasn't like the Ransom Center is a really beautiful state-of-the-art facility. I was in a 100-year-old building next door, cold storage, no windows, 68 degrees. That happened to be the hottest summer in 100 years in Austin, Texas. So it was a pretty wild experience. But there's a great category of hot dogs. So a photo morgue, as you may know, is basically just a sort of the where all the print photographs or wire photographs that a newspaper would receive and then use in print would get stored to be accessed later on. And the New York Journal American, I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, but the hot dogs are great. Some of the photos, as you can see on the right, were in really horrible condition. Some of them still smelled like a dark room, which just is really horrible for preservation reasons, but also gives you a sense of like how this work was happening. Prints being made very quickly, and then being shared as quickly as possible, whether or not they were actually clean and dry. So that collection, we just used, I think, their organizational scheme on the left there is just a screenshot of some of their categories. And it's just alphabetical. It's really at the sort of most granular level here. So here's I took a lot of pictures of the Halloween category, and you can see Halloween is in between Halloran General Hospital, Halsey Bay Nursery, and hamburgers. So it's that is really reflective of the way that it was used by the newspaper, but not always the most accessible. Another sort of way of organizing images like this is, as I've mentioned, the photographs of work of art or visual resources. So art history is itself, as the way it is now as a field, is not much older than photography. It's most often taught using surrogate images that depict the artwork in question. But again, a photograph is a representation. It's not always a perfect simulacra of the object. I call these surrogates. So you'll see on the right, we have this Vermeer painting represented in many different photographs, many different means of varying quality. Because for decades, art history was taught using printed photograph collections, many mounted on board, like the Paul Rheingold photograph collection. They were organized by the field of study. So examples are medieval art, European painting, East Asian decorative arts. A lot of these distinctions still correspond to the way we study things now, but not always. And on the left here, I will take any opportunity to mention Abby Vorberg, who's a foundational art historian who's famous for his Builder Atlas. There's still a library in his name. So his Builder Atlas was 400,000 images classified according to more than 20,000 categories by his own sort of idiosyncratic methodology. He was mostly interested in iconography and symbolism. And you can see on the left here, this is a panel that he would use in teaching, where he would arrange images as he saw fit to draw connections, compare and contrast different images when teaching art history. His categorization has been put online. In part, it is pretty wacky, but I really love it. It's very charming. Okay, and then the most relevant example I have here is the picture collection. I'm going to talk about these for a few minutes because they're wonderful, because they actually gave rise to the modern photographic archive, because while written archives date back to the ancient world, photography, as we know, is not quite 200 years old. And it was out of reach of most regular people until about 100 years ago. So picture collection is a term that refers to a collection of pictures held by a library. The picture on the left here, I believe, is from the New York Public Library, so I'll talk about that a little bit. At the turn of the 20th century, John Cotton Dana, who's an important figure in information studies, was working as a librarian in New Jersey. And he published a series of articles basically about categorization in libraries. He said, it seems impossible to devise any permanently satisfactory system of classification that would include all the details of arrangement and settle the complications that are continually arising. The classification of this collection frequently undergoes minor changes, the primary object being not so much to keep it a model of consistency as to have the arrangement such that the borrowers can use the collection with ease. And this sort of echoes something that Paul has said about, his sorting of images, is that a certain folder or category might get too big, so then you start to subdivide to make it so it's actually useful. So here is, on the right is a sort of diagram of the picture collection room from the library in New Jersey where Dana was working. And we have some of his categorization. It's pretty common sense in a lot of cases, but also shows you, I think he was building it. They have these pictures, and then how do you divide from there? So it kind of shows you the kind of materials that they're actually working with. So there's not everything. We have armor, astronomy, canoes. So concepts, but also the sort of objects that you might see in the picture. So the picture collection at the New York Public Library still exists. It really set the gold standard. It was established in 1915. Romana Javits is the luminary of the field. She had a lot to say about libraries versus museums. And it was important to her that this collection circulated, and it still does. Like, you can still go there. I went there. You can take pictures out with your New York Public Library card. And they have about a I think it's 476 page binder with all their categories. And again, the organization is kind of all over the place here. I just kind of grabbed some folders. I've got greenhouses, gargoyles. Here's a picture from greenhouses that had to do with what's the Biosphere 2, which is a fun project to think about. So the picture collection, it was formed organically, was assembled from magazine clippings, illustrations from books, postcards, and photographs. So most of these formats obviously rely on photomechanical reproduction, but there were still some actual photographs in this collection, which I learned about from talking to an archivist there. So I learned that in the 1930s, Roy Stryker was actually, during the FSA photography work, he didn't trust the government to preserve all the FSA photographs. So he was actually secretly sending copies to the New York Public Library, and they were actually in the picture collection circulating. And this is one of those collections through the changing views over times, where it wasn't until the 1980s that those photographs were removed to the archives. So that's the FSA, the Farm Security Administration, through the Works Progress Administration, of course, from the New Deal. And that had actually also funded some library work as well. Let's see. Okay, so in thinking about this work, there was a great article in New York Times about the picture collection. So Jessica Klein, who was running it at the time, was talking about this sort of split from moving these photographs that are useful in the picture collection as sort of a reference, moving them into the archives, where they obviously have a different value. She says, you're not coming here to look for Dorothea Lange. You're here to look for farm life. So I thought that this is really just an emblematic of this kind of split. And this is, obviously a famous sort of set of images from the FSA photographs that I think it's just really rich to be able to see not just the one famous migrant mother, but to see all the pictures around it. So let's see, I'll speed up a little bit. I feel like I'm dragging. Okay, so then getting back to Paul's collection, I have not fully processed it. I've done about 70 bankers boxes. So that's some of the photos in storage on the left there. This is the way it looks inside of one folder. This is the religious category. Sort of working to negotiate between what's in a box and then what is on the spreadsheet or document of the taxonomy. Most of the collections I've been kind of talking about have a flat arrangement, but Paul's arrangement is more hierarchical, so it gets a little more complicated. So we also have some oversized boxes. Most things fit in those bankers boxes, but we have some things in oversize. Looking into one box here, we have beautiful stained glass window. We have what Paul has called a Mary card, and I think that's a great description for what we have on the right there. We have some nuns. I was noting in the New York Public Library picture collection, they have a category for convents, but no nuns. They had like snuck one nun in the convent category, but Paul's got a category for nuns, and I love them, having some nuns in my family. Some other sort of fun things for parallels. This is from the New York Public Library picture collection. They have an accidents folder. And then, so these are different clippings, magazine pages. Paul has some accidents. Series A, right at the top, we have not accidents, but disasters in the elements. So we have floods here. I had gotten myself mixed up. I was trying to remember where the train wrecks were. They're not in disaster. Paul has them under transportation, which makes more sense. I have this spreadsheet, so I looked for rec, found my recs. Fall off bridge is a really good one. So there we have one of our great train wrecks, falling off a bridge. Great stuff. Okay. So how do I hope this collection gets used? I think that the possibilities are really endless. Anyone can come. We're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 4 in the reading room. I don't have a complete finding aid up online yet. This is one of those cases where archives really are mediated. So you'll have to come and talk to me to figure out what you want to see. And I can help you find what you might be looking for. Um, but yeah, I have some ideas about how this collection might be used, but I'm really open to all the possibilities. So picture collections do circulate, ours don't, because we are concerned with preservation. I'll go back here. There are myriad uses to be made of this collection. One sort of special feature is that most of the works are orphans when it comes to copyright. That means a work has no discernible creator or copyright holder. And for images made before 1923, which includes most of these, they're in the public domain already. So you can use them for truly anything. The digital images will be freely usable for artists or anyone who wants to use them for an illustration because they'll be in the public domain. I've had a lot of fun using this collection for teaching visual literacy with undergraduate students. I've worked with an instructor who has brought his students to our seminar room to think about archives and photography, asking questions like, when you don't have a caption for an image, what can you figure out? And you have to use your imagination. As I said before, many of these students have likely never held a photograph like this. And I'd love to see students thinking about the materiality of photography and art, and thinking about them as primary sources with information to share. And then, going back to my work as an artist, I've thought about parallels there. So thinking again about the New York Public Library picture collection, there's a photographer I really like named Taryn Simon, who does a lot of sort of documentary work. She did a lot of research in the picture collection there, had a show and a book called The Color of a Flea's Eye, where the photographs pictured on the wall here are the contents of one of those folders that I showed you. And then she did a lot of research in the archive, sort of uncovering the labor that had taken place over time. So it's really interesting to see this sort of like sterile environment and think about the picture collection itself, which is still really like dynamic and alive. Another of my favorite art projects is this book called Evidence by the artists Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan. Sort of conceptual, but they compiled this book in 1977 from photographs extracted from functional archives, so government archives, educational institutions, corporate archives. And they sort of pull these photographs together for their aesthetic value. So they're really presented without any context. There's a list in the back of all the organizations, but it's just a fun sort of visual exercise. There's some really weird photographs in there. And then finally, there are some smaller projects. This is a book called Dive Dark, Dream Slow by Melissa Catneth, who's a photographer herself, but she has also worked with a private collection that sounds a lot like Paul's. It's the photography collection of Peter J. Cohen, who had only a mere 20,000 photographs, vernacular and found photographs, which he gathered in sort of different method from Paul, gathering from flea markets, dealers, eBay. But then Melissa, as she was sort of working with this collection, she curated sort of her own selections. The books and the accompanying show, she sequenced them in a meaningful way. So the possibilities are endless. I'm happy to talk to you all more about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Annie. It's a great collection. I love hearing about teaching visual literacy and the way that students can encounter these things for the first time, never having held a photograph from, before they were born. And so many students grew up with digital photography now. It's like another world. So one thing we like to do is give our presenters a round of applause. So if everybody would like to unmute and give Annie a round of applause. Much.
Sorry,
Thank
I
you.
apologize. I feel like I went on way too long. I apologize.
Not at all. And it's wonderful to have Paul and Joyce here. Did I get your name right, Joyce? Okay. So it's just the work that goes into building a collection like this and to create an organization, an order, categories. It's really wonderful, Annie, that you had those documents, and this was something that was a living relationship between you all. Um, could you talk a little bit more about what it was like first going out to the house and seeing everything and talking to Paul about how he collected?
Yeah. So, I had a little bit of experience in photo archives, or just in archives in general. But I had visited some donors as an intern, and in library school and in archives in general, you hear horror stories about nightmare donors. But Paul is a dream. Paul and Joyce are both really wonderful, and I'm not just saying that because they're here. I mean, it was like a 3-hour drive with my new boss. But it was great to talk to him about photography, and just getting to talk to Paul and Joyce about photographs, and not just the sort of treasures, but also just sort of like logistics of like, I have this all in my house and I need to get it out. Yeah, Paul and Joyce are lovely. They have a beautiful home. And it's been really valuable just to be able to keep talking to him over time.
That's great. And Ken has a question. Ken Kaiser asks, are any platinum prints in the collection and how do you search for them?
I haven't come across any. I don't know if you did, Paul. I think Paul has held apart many albumin prints just because they're a little bit easier to identify. Um, I think if we did get into the details, we might be able to identify some. And the way that the way that they're currently accessible and the way that they will be accessible is not going to really be so much by format, except in those cases where it's obvious. Because what we're working from is this organizational scheme. So then that's going to be my job, is just to provide access to that. And then anyone will be welcome to come and identify any process they wish. And then we'll be happy to hold that information if we do. We are doing a digitization project now. And if we can identify processes easily, we'll put that online. But as you know, it's a lot of work.
That Gowan Weaver course is really well known and everybody regards it really highly. I did a Image Permanence Institute from RIT course at the MFA. And it
I would
was
love to do that.
so yeah, you really have to work with them to really learn how to identify.
Yeah. The Graphics Atlas is a website I use a lot.
Graphics Atlas is great.
Yeah. And again, yeah, just this is something being sort of deteriorated really does help you identify processes, silver mirroring or interference colors, scratches. Yeah.
Steve asks, are there industrial or factory photographs in the collection? If so, how categorized and what time periods?
And how?
Good.
Feel free to jump in, Paul.
Right.
Yeah, Paul's got two. I love this. Paul has two categories of working because there's so many. They're split apart. So yeah, there's a lot of industrial settings, a lot of great like group portraits of workers outside of factories, which I really love. And I think Paul's got them. One of we have a lot of like inside and outside distinctions. Then we have, if you can identify what type of industry it is or what type of factory, we'll have that. I'm trying to pull up the image of the document in my head. I mean, yeah, that's something where if you want to follow up with me, I can share the spreadsheet with you. I think I've got those partially processed.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
What about the materials? Is that something that you have a budget for while you're processing this collection specifically for Paul's collection, or is it part of the budget for the department?
It's right now it's part of the budget for the department. We're able to use pretty standard materials. So I've got acid-free banker's boxes, and the flat boxes are acid-free folders. The physical arrangement, you typically with a photograph collection, you want things to be flat, but that's for unmounted photographs because these are mounted, and because they pose a real preservation problem because the photographic material deteriorates at a different rate than the board does. So there's a lot of warping that happens. None of them are really flat. So actually keeping them upright has seems to be working pretty well. So we can just do that in typical folders. Some things I've been like sleeving with like Mylar or polyester sleeves, but that's stuff I have laying around anyway.
It can get very expensive. I know
Yes.
my work, and Gaylord is a company that many people use for archival supplies and sleeves and boxing for photographs, but it can get quite expensive, and
Yeah.
having a budget for that for such a large project is really key.
Yeah. It is very expensive. Yeah, we use Gaylord and Sollinger and University Projects, which is based out here.
Oh, just a second. Becky says, could you share your email for additional questions after this talk? That would be great.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the chat.
I'll put that there right now.
And Jessica says, years ago, I worked at the Polaroid image files held at Clarence Kennedy Gallery. Amazing that they were index cards with SX70 or Type 55 images of the actual image affixed. Typed or handwritten notes, archival boxes, all or digital.
That's very cool. I would love to hear more about that.
And Steve says, do you have interns helping out, and what do they think?
We typically have undergraduate student workers every semester. I haven't had anyone working on it this semester, but I had an intern. And she had a lot of fun. I think she was a little bit older, so she, it wasn't all like completely unfamiliar to her, the idea of like a physical photograph. But I do have students who want to get working on it, so it's been a little chaotic, but I'm hoping to get someone set up pretty soon. And with the digitization that will be starting soon, that'll be a lot of fun. I'll be working with a student I haven't really worked with before, so we'll see how he does.
Let's see. John says, do you have any photos of the construction of the Quabbin Reservoir?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do? We do, Paul? Okay.
And John says, do you have any photos of Quaker meeting houses?
Paul says no. We have a whole like category of religious, which includes a lot of churches, but I think yeah. But for both of these, the Quabbin and the Quaker, those are like things that really overlap with other collections. We have some Quabbin collections, the towns before they were flooded. We have some great stuff. Again, any of this, please feel free to email me and we can follow up. And then, of course, we have the Quaker collections, but not a lot of photographic material.
Let's do a few more questions. Bill asks, do you have many autochromes in the collection? And if you do you have diascopes to view them through?
No autochromes in Paul's collection. As I mentioned before, I thought we had some autochromes in another collection. We do not have a diascope. I can look into that though.
And Jessica just said pre-digital at Polaroid. This is so great, and we look forward to seeing them online when they start to get digitized. Or we had a presentation from the Cape Ann Museum who had a huge photo morgue of local paper photographs.
Oh, cool.
They are digitizing, and I can put you in touch
Yeah.
with them. I'm sure you guys would love it.
Fabulous.
And you know, the thing about collecting is you get to choose how to arrange it, and it's so great that you could preserve the original order of what Paul created. I think that's brilliant, and it adds such value to
Yeah.
you know, the way people find things and the way they discover them, because you may be looking at one category and see that there's another category in the same box that you hadn't even thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. And it tells us a lot about Paul, which I think is fun.
Are you still collecting, Paul?
No.
I had a great time talking to Paul's grandson about about just this years-long project of sorting. And it's just you can really tell, I mean, from the arrangement, just the different categories that emerged. It's really wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I think we're at about time. One more round of applause. Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your work with us also. I really love seeing the zines and the
Oh,
photographs.
thank you.
Glad you're going to be a member with us. And
Yeah.
yeah, and anyone who does want to pay a visit, please contact Annie. It sounds like a great experience. Everyone is saying thank you. So
Thank you. Thank you all very much for the attention. Yeah.
it's great to have you. Just closing things out tonight, I want to thank everyone for coming, Annie for presenting, Paul and Joyce for being here. And just to note that next month we don't have a presentation because we are prepping for Photographica on April 26th, Saturday. It's going to be at Newton North High School, 457 Walnut Street. 7 a.m. is early bird admission for $20. PHSNE members, students, teachers, and active military with ID are free. Everyone else is $5, and the general admission is from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Don't forget the magical dollar tables. Those are always a favorite, and we hope to see everyone there. And if you have any suggestions for presentations, you can email me at programs@phsne.org. And I hope everyone got their issue of the journal, the 2024 journal that came out. Great job. Really wonderful issue. And there is also a big announcement for Photographica on the back. So thanks everyone for coming. See you in May. Carl Mestandrea will be presenting on camera repair. So we are going back to equipment. And I hope you'll join us for that too. So thanks everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks,
you.
Sean. Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Paul.
Thank you, Dana.
Thanks, Dana. Bye-bye.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.